Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlight Series. In Benchmark 1.4, we're going to be analyzing how Enlightenment ideas, including Montesquieu's view of separation of powers and John Locke's theories related to natural law and Locke's social contract, all influenced the founding. Our focus in Part 2 is the influence of Enlightenment thinkers' ideas on the founders' beliefs about individual liberties and government. So first we're going to examine how Enlightenment ideas influence the founders' beliefs about individual liberties and government, followed by evaluating the influence of Montesquieu's and Locke's ideas on the founding fathers. So how did the Enlightenment ideas presented by John Locke influence the founders' beliefs about individual liberties and government? Well, those key ideas come from a set of two books, the two treatises of civil government, that were published in 1689, written by John Locke. John Locke's focus had to do with what was the relationship between the public and government. How do we guarantee individual liberties while also guaranteeing that we are protected and supported by the government? Are there areas where perhaps individual liberties are stressed and government power is reduced? Are there areas where government power is enhanced while individual liberties might be reduced? So let's look at some of these in the context of social contract and natural law. John Locke believed in the idea of a social contract. He argued that the government should function so that the people can keep the government accountable for its actions. What this means is that the people hold government accountable in the fact that the people decide who holds power in government, either directly or indirectly. So in this particular instance, the government makes sure that the people are able to see what the government is doing, that the government functions in a transparent way, because the only way to hold someone accountable for their actions is to know what those actions are. When we're focusing on the concept of natural law means that the government should make laws and policies that protect the people's natural rights, the rights that they have simply by being born, the rights that people have by virtue of being born. People are also born with individual liberties, and the government should avoid making policies that limit natural rights and individual abilities. Now, we understand that there's also the concept of the public interest. And this is why there continues to be an ongoing debate about how much power the government should have and how much our liberties should be protected, because as a person who exists in our society, I have individual liberties, but naturally not all of our individual liberties are without constraint or without limitation, and that is for the sake of the public interest. Naturally, there are going to be debates about, is there too much government power taking power away from individuals, or is there not enough power that the government is using, which thus threatens individual liberties and individual freedoms? How did the Enlightenment ideas presented by Baron de Montesquieu influence the founders' beliefs about individual liberties and government? Charles Louis de Secondant, the Baron de Montesquieu, published a book originally in French, Montesquieu was French, that translates to The Spirit of the Laws. And as you can see from the dates, Locke's books were published in 1689, but Montesquieu's books were published in 1748, so over 50 years later. So here, Montesquieu focused on the concept of how should government function within the context of the public interest. So Montesquieu argued, for example, that there should be a separation of powers, that the legislative, executive, and judicial should be separated into three branches, and that no person may hold office in more than one branch of government. Now, the argument is that one reduces government abusing its power when the three powers of government are separated out. However, separation of powers on its own does not mean that no single branch of government will abuse its powers. And that's why Montesquieu also supported the concept of checks and balances, that each branch of government has some power to limit the use of the powers by at least one of the two other branches. But at the same time, the idea works in reverse. Since the legislative branch can check the power of the executive branch, and that limits the power of the executive branch, so too can the executive branch limit the power of the legislative branch. And so the idea of checks and balances is that the different branches of government can have a say in how at least one other branch is functioning, but at the same time, every single branch of government has at least one, if not two, branches of government that can impact what they do. So separation of powers and checks and balances, they are two concepts that we often hear in the same sentence, but they are not synonyms. The separation of powers limits the abuse of power only so much. Checks and balances further enhances separation of powers in that the different branches can limit what the other ones do. So what was the influence of Locke's ideas on the founding fathers? Well, when it came to the concept of a social contract, government officials are selected by the people through election or appointment. Appointed officials are placed in their positions by elected officials. So, for example, even though members of the United States Supreme Court are appointed to their positions, it is a person who is elected to the presidency who nominates them, which means that appointed officials are in their positions by an elected official. Therefore, if people are unhappy with the decisions about who got appointed, they can hold the person who made the appointment accountable. For example, if someone is upset about the choices that a president might make in choosing members of the Supreme Court or members of their cabinet, they may choose against re-electing that president in the next election if that president is running for re-election. What about natural law? There are fundamental rights reflected in natural law that should be protected by government. These natural rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. The founding fathers updated the concept of pursuit of property to pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness is a much broader concept than the pursuit of property. There are things more than property that make us happy, but certainly property might be one of those things, but not the only thing. Natural law is the idea that because we exist, we have natural rights, and thus the government, in protecting those rights, should protect our life, liberty, and according to Locke, the pursuit of property, but according to Thomas Jefferson, when he used these same words in the Declaration of Independence, he changed the phrase to pursuit of happiness. What was the influence of Montesquieu's ideas on the founding fathers? Looking at separation of powers, the three powers of government are separated into three branches of government. So in the United States, we have a Congress, we have an executive branch, and we have a judiciary branch. If you look at the United States Constitution, you will find that these three branches of government are separated even within the Constitution, such that Article 1, we focus on Congress. Article 2, we focus on the executive branch. Article 3, we focus on the judiciary branch. When it comes to checks and balances, the three branches of government each possess power to limit one or more actions. So, for example, if Congress passes a law with which the president disagrees, the president has the formal power in the Constitution to veto that law, to, in essence, to tell Congress, this law will not be passed because I disagree with it. But the Constitution also allows Congress to override the president's veto, meaning that if 2/3 of each House of Congress disagree with the president's veto, then the Congress can override the president's veto. I'll give you a little piece of trivia here. Only 7% of all laws passed by Congress that have been vetoed have been overridden, meaning that going back to 1789 with President Washington, only 7% of all presidential vetoes have been overridden. So that means that 93% of the time, if the president disagrees with a law that Congress has passed and the president vetoes that law, the president usually gets their way, 93% of the time. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? Please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.